Hey guys, welcome back. While I was painting up the base for my last video for the Telmon Dreadnought, which was the black and white marble effect bases, I had an idea that this same technique could be applied to the panelling of tanks, so I thought I'd give it a try and see what I could come up with. And I happened to have a bunch of Eldar tanks, which I had 3D printed a while back, and one of them happened to be a Hornet. Now, this Hornet must be a proxy model of some kind, as it's the exact same model as the Games Workshop Hornet, the only difference being this one seems to be missing all of the gems. And I'm assuming this is something to do with avoiding copyright. In any case, it's still going to work for my purposes, so let's get into it. The first step is starting from a black primer and to block out any of the areas that we want to be marbled in white. And in my case, this would be the two front wings. And this step is actually an optional step, as I'm only really doing it to increase the vibrancy of the next step. But you could also start from pure black here without much difference. We're then going to take the colour or colours that we want the grain of the marble to be, and then apply that over the white parts of the model. And in my case, that's going to be magenta, and I'm also going to be transitioning from dark magenta at the front of the vehicle to bright magenta at the back. But technically you could use any colour or colour combinations here. It just depends on how you want your marbling effect to turn out at the end. But I'll be using Diabolic Plum for the dark magenta and Spellbound Fuchsia for the bright magenta. The next part of the process is where I use a fully dried out wet wipe and stretch it out by hand, just slowly pulling at it from all sides until eventually it produces a spider web like pattern, and then you can cut out small sections of the wet wipe and then use them to mask over all of the sections on the model that we want to be marbled. Now, this is slightly more tricky than to do it on a circular base, as the shape of the area, and in this case the wings of the model, can be awkwardly shaped, which makes it difficult to place the wet wipe on the area and secure it. I managed to wrap the webbed wet wipe around the wing, and then I applied a small amount of gloss varnish to the underside of the wing where the wet wipe made contact. And this was enough to secure the wet wipe in place to allow me to proceed to the next step. Next up, we're going to be painting in the main colouring for the marbling and the tank itself. And to keep this in line with the rest of my Aeldari Wraith force, I'm going to be building up some volumetric highlights using the Army Painter Turquoise Triad. And this is just the same technique I used for all my Aeldari, with the only difference being that this time I'm going to be applying it over the top of the webbed wet wipe. I start with applying the darkest colour all over the model, and then just progress to applying some spot highlights with the lighter colours. And because of the wet wipe and the fact that we will be wanting to remove it at some point, you really need to be careful here at this stage not to cause any pooling with your airbrushing. So just make sure your mixture inside your cup is not too wet, and just take your time here applying multiple light coats, allowing plenty of time between each application. And this way you're going to avoid any pooling occurring on the surface of the model, which would then stick to the wet wipe, which can potentially lead to the paint peeling when you remove the wet wipe from the model. But as long as you take your time with this, you should be okay. Next, it was time to peel away the wet wipe, in the hopes that the marbling effect had been successful. And again, just take your time here. If you do find that the wet wipe is a little bit stuck to the paint, just try and slowly pry it away to make sure you're not pulling off any chunks of paint along with it. And thankfully my attempt was successful, without any major cracks or chipping. And the only thing I would really change if I was doing this again is I would most likely use brighter colours, but apart from that I was pretty happy with the result. Next up, I blacked out the windows and then started to highlight them up using the Army Painter Vivid Blue Triad. And I just spot highlighted this onto the window panels and also used the exact same colours to paint in the base for the model as well. And after that was done, I spent a little bit of time painting in a few of the armour panels on the model in the same Army Painter Magenta Triad, like I do with the rest of my Craftworld Mymeara models. I also use the same colours to paint in all of the gemstones on the base as well. And once that was done, the model was really starting to take shape and was looking good enough to be finished. However, I wanted this to match the rest of my Craftworld Mymeara army, so I went ahead and applied the usual Mr. Weathering pigment to the entire model and then cleaned off all of the excess. I'm not going to go into that process in this video, as I do have quite a few videos already on how I go about that process. So if you haven't seen it already, you can just check out one of my previous Mymeara videos. And with the weathering applied, that's the model now complete. And I'm delighted with the way the marbling turned out on this model. And I'm going to be for sure using this for the rest of my Aeldari Mymeara tanks. And it would also be interesting to try this out with different colours as well to see the various effects that can be achieved with this technique. But that's all for today's video, and as always I hope you found the video useful, and if you have any questions about the technique, just let me know in the comments below. But until then, happy painting, and I'll catch you in the next one.